Okay, so I'm not at all used to holding a microphone. I'm also never used to just standing there and talking. I gotta walk around. And for the folks that are standing, if you guys want to like walk around and you won't distract me, kind of bend your legs. But y'all do me a favor, if you see me drop the mic and talk like this, they're gonna get angry, so remind me to keep the mic up. I'll try to do my best. So I thought because there's a lot of military folks here, I'd tell a brief story about how I got into this career. When I was little, my father was a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and I remember I was like 5 or 6 years old, and my father told my mother, hey, bring Joey outside around whatever time it was, and I'm going to be up in the air doing all sorts of crazy stuff in the air. So sure enough, around 12 o'clock or whatever, we go outside, and there's my father looping and barrel rolling across the sky, and I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And you know, there comes this point in your life where your father sits you down and says, we have to have a talk, son. And you know, you're thinking sex or something. Am I allowed to say that? You're thinking, I don't know what my dad's I don't know what my dad wants to talk to me about. It probably wasn't sex, because I was probably only about 7 years old. And he says, son, you can't be a fighter pilot. Because I have bad eyesight, right? I had glasses, I still do. And I remember crying and crying and crying. I mean, it was just devastating to me, because I wanted to be just like my dad. But I remember I wiped my tears and I said, okay, I guess I'll be a lawyer. So anyway, I finished college and I went to start law school, and I said, to hell with this. And the next thing you know, I started writing software. So I've been a software developer for, that's my story. It's kind of anticlimactic. I've been a software developer, God, since I was like 14 years old, man. I've been writing software, and you know, I still wanted to help my country, so I started working at Disney. It's kind of crazy. I worked for Disney for quite a long time. When I was there, I actually started getting into writing security software, and a couple of colleagues of mine and myself, we started writing basically the security architecture for the entire Walt Disney Corporation. I mean, cruise lines, hotels, ABC, ESPN, you name it. And that's kind of what got me into the field, and it's a pretty exciting field, in my opinion. There's so many parts of it, though, right? There's so many parts to security. I talk about it, actually I often give a military description of it. There's layers of defense and security, right? You have a perimeter, like a firewall. You have gates. You have application pathways. There's all these things that you have to do. And one of the most least sexy things in security is the notion of passwords. It's not very complicated. It's not very challenging to understand the concepts we're going to go through. But if you imagine a bank that has put in layer after layer after layer after layer of security, and basically there's a combination to the safe, or there's a key to get to the front door, and I leave my key on the ground, or I write my combination on somewhere on a piece of paper, all those layers of security are almost worth nothing. And this is a huge risk to the organization. It's a huge risk to the servers we have. It's a huge risk to security. And so we need to treat passwords kind of with respect, and the issue with passwords. So if you didn't know already, what's the problem? If you go online and you look up articles on passwords, you're going to see people say things like, passwords are irrelevant. We need to get rid of passwords. You literally see that today. Get rid of passwords, they're worthless, there's no point in them. All of those guys are wrong. If you really think about it, it's not about getting rid of passwords, it's about changing the way we do passwords, okay? It's not just simply about getting rid of them. And so, yeah, if you didn't know already, let's take a look at some statistics and kind of delve into this a little bit more. 3 out of 4 consumers use duplicate passwords, many of which have not been changed in 5 years or more. Now, this is real data we're talking about here. This is not just me, you know, pumping out garbage. This is a big deal. We all know things like you need to change your passwords. I go to the extreme. Not only do I have different passwords for everywhere I go to, I have different IDs for everywhere I go to. I don't use the same email address everywhere I go to. I'm a little nutty when it comes to this kind of stuff, though. But this is a big risk, right? This is just one example. Let's take a look at another one. 40% of those surveyed say they had a security incident in the past year. It's 2 out of 5 people. Okay, so a security incident means something like someone's using your email, someone broke into your bank account, someone's access the server that you were getting into, et cetera. There's all sorts of different things. So let's look at some fun facts, right? I love these facts. And what I want you guys to do is, as we learn about these fun facts, I want you to think about how I know these fun facts, right? How is it possible that these statistics that I'm popping up here, or this information, how do I know this? So here, just for fun, the top 10 literary movie or TV passwords. Let's take a look at some of these. This is one of my all-time favorites. If you guys are familiar with Spaceballs, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you know, it's funny, like who would actually have a password like that? I like the one from Matrix. That one's kind of cool. Not the hardest one to break. It's not even about breaking passwords, honestly, but it's funny, you know, people see these things and they kind of go, well, that's a fun password. It's not really a bad thing that you have a password like this. If some people are saying passwords are irrelevant, and I'm going to tell you that there's a twist, right? We have to just handle them differently. It may not even matter what your password is. We'll get to that. But it gets worse, right? Let's take a look at these statistics here. Now, this is from the Adobe Breach, okay, which my wife was a part of, right? Her user ID and password was stolen in this breach. And the stuff I'm going to show you here, honestly, is absolutely mind-boggling to me. I mean, truly mind-boggling to me. In the data that was breached from Adobe, 2 million accounts had the password 123456. Right? 2 million people had 123456. And it's just astonishing to me. Now, think for a second and look at this one right here. And these people were really smart. They said, that's ridiculous, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You need to make it more complicated. All right, so we're going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which quite honestly, that's not going to take any more time to hack than the one above it. It says when you fill out your Adobe account, put your password here. 345,000 people did. Okay, so I love that one. Finally, not being too creative, 211,000 people had Adobe 123. So it's pretty obvious here that we're dealing with something that's pretty significant, right? We're basically talking about this chain, again, of security. And that chain's going to break at some point. We know what comes next, right? You're going to get hacked. And so, again, this is pretty significant. It's the human being that we're dealing with here, right? It's not the firewalls failing. It's not I have an IIS server and you know, China has found a vulnerability in IIS and they're exploiting that vulnerability. That's way too hard. It's a hell of a lot easier just simply to say, try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and see if you get in. There's even other ways. I mean, I study a lot of ethical hacking, and it's amazing. Anybody here watch Mr. Robot? Anybody seen that show? Yeah, great show. One of my all-time favorite things in Mr. Robot, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a scene where they're trying to break into a company called Steel Mountain, which is the fake equivalent of a company called Iron Mountain. Iron Mountain is a secure document company, document destruction company. Well, they need to break into this company. And so one of the hackers takes a handful of USB keys and just kind of walks through the corporate parking lot dropping USB keys on the ground. And sure enough, what do you do when you find a USB key? Every single person in this room is going to say, I'm going to plug it in and see what's on it. I mean, there are very few people in this room, including myself, who are not going to want to see what's on that USB key. Well, what was on it was something that got into the environment. Now, that's not a, by the way, I do it in a very special way. I do it in a virtual machine. I plug in the USB key, see what's on it. I'm curious, right? Everybody's curious. But no matter what we do in security, no matter what we do with making sure, again, our firewalls are secure, that our software is patched, that the network has intelligence and knows what you're doing, no matter what we do, there's always going to be a weakest link, and unfortunately, that's people. And when it comes to passwords and what people do with passwords, that's what one of our biggest vulnerabilities are, right? So that's called human security, right? There's another analogy to human security, which is our physical security also. There's stories about hackers putting on exterminator uniforms, right, with a clipboard. And what they do is they go onto LinkedIn Or they go onto Google and they say, you know, who's the IT director of the Augusta, Georgia office? And it says his name's Bob Smothers or whatever. Okay, so you print out a fake email with Bob Smothers on it. You say, please get the exterminator here right away into the server room. The guy dresses up like an exterminator, shows up at the front desk and says, I'm the exterminator. Bob Smothers told me to go exterminate your server room. And they go, come on in. This isn't fake. This happens. It happens a lot, right? So it's another example of human security. And so, again, I'm kind of beating this point to death. That's because they told me I needed to stretch for an hour, but no, but it's important. I'm a huge proponent of making sure that organizations and companies know what it means to not only secure their environment, but to secure their people. So let's talk about solutions. And again, if someone has a question, please feel free to let me know. We're going to talk about what basically are called in the industry password reduction technologies. It's kind of not the best description in the world, because one of the things I'm going to show you really doesn't have to do with password reduction. Let's just put it this way. When I go through the next couple of things on this slide, you're going to see that what I mean by password reduction. And I'm kind of using an industry term, but it's fairly broad. The first thing we're going to talk about in today's session, really when it comes to password reduction, is web access management. And we're going to get into some detail with that, so I'm not going to read the subtext here, but that's the first thing we're going to talk about is web access management. One of the biggest things that you can do is taking away the necessity for passwords and basically changing the way that passwords are being used. And this is one of the ways you can do it. Again, we're going to delve deeper into that one. The next thing we're going to talk about is privileged access management. And this is often overlooked, like it says. And to me, again, this is the hacker's holy grail. Let's talk about, again, I feel so sorry for some of these people. I'm not going to try to talk about the OPM breach. I'm going to, but Target gets beat up to death. And one of the reasons why Target Corporation gets beat up to death is because we know so much about how they got hacked and what happened when they got hacked. Basically, one of the things that happened to them is they got a privileged password, a privileged account that was stolen. And it's not, again, that, hey, with this privileged account, I can now access the Active Directory server, I can go access this server. That's not at all what the hackers did, because they're not stupid, because that privileged account will change its password as soon as something's seen. They actually use the privileged account to create a backdoor account, all right? So once they created a backdoor account, they said, I don't care about the privileged account anymore, I'm going to come in with my backdoor account. And because they didn't have proper governance, they didn't see that an identity was created out of the proper stream, and that person just had a constant pathway that they could network through and do the things they needed to do. So again, we'll get into more detail of that in a second. Multifactor, of course, that should be what everybody's thinking to themselves. And then this is, to me, anyone that tells you, get rid of passwords, they're irrelevant, there is no solution to get rid of passwords at the moment. It can't be done. The only thing we can do is combine it with multifactor. And we're going to talk about that and about how there's a number of roadblocks people have to multifactor. There's a lot of reasons why people say, I'm not using multifactor. We're going to talk about some of those things in a minute and kind of get into that. But basically, these are the three things we're going to focus on today. There may be some other little small things that we could talk about, but quite honestly, if we're talking about low-hanging fruit, right, something that we can do instantly, something that we can implement overnight that doesn't really require training our users to not be so careless, these are the things that we can do. Okay, we can't trust our users anymore, so this is what we're going to do. All right, so web access management, the first thing we're going to talk about. People confuse web access management with single sign-on, and they say, there's a product out there you can get from Microsoft called Active Directory Federation Services, right? It's free, and you get what you pay for. Basically, that's a single sign-on product. It's not web access management. What I want to do is I want to talk about what web access management is and why that's different than single sign-on. So the other thing why web access management is so important is, as we all know, apps are more and more web-based. For most of my life, well, gosh, I don't know, that was a long time ago, but I spent a lot of time writing client-server applications, right? Database applications, business applications, and whatever. And I remember when people said, that's all going to go away, it's all going to be web-based, I thought they were crazy, quite honestly. I thought, maybe some of it will be web-based, but quite honestly now, if anybody's building a client-server application, there's got to be a very specific reason for it. There's got to be something about that application that needs to be run on a computer. Maybe it's highly graphical, or the processing power it needs, whatever. the simple fact is that that evolution has happened, and it's true. Most apps that we access today are web-based. Apps are mobile, so we're seeing a lot of mobile apps too. As a matter of fact, it seems today, I mean, I sell software with Dell Corporation now. It seems today I don't get asked in any engagement I go into at all, is there a mobile client for this? I get asked every single time, nearly 100% of the time. So the security glue in these are basically is the identity provider, and that's what web access management is going to provide. Again, we're going to get into a little bit more detail with this in a second. An identity provider can eliminate the biggest risks, and I wish I didn't have this in my presentation, because I can't say it. Password proliferation. Thank you. Password proliferation. So, why do you care? All right, let's talk about why web access management is so critical. A lot of people see, and I think I may have this on the following bullet point, but that's okay. Let's just talk about it now. A lot of people see single sign-on as a user convenience. Users have all these user IDs and passwords. They complain about it. They write it down. And it's really funny because I was at a company recently. Remember this? I was at a company recently, and I said, people write their passwords down. They go, oh, no one does that here. I said, oh, you mean like on sticky notes? They're like, yeah. I said, do you put it in an Excel document, like an encrypted Excel document? They go, well, yeah, that's writing it down, folks. Okay, you wrote it down. Okay, people don't. Anyway, so once people realize that, they take the blinders off and they go, oh yeah, you're right. We do write it down. So they look at this situation where people have all these different web applications, even mobile apps, and I've got a different user ID and password for this one. I've got a different user ID and password for this one. And they kind of say, it sure would be nice for our users if we gave them a single sign-on system that they could log into, and it would automatically log them into wherever they needed to go and remember their passwords and everything. It would be nice for our users. Screw nice. This isn't about being nice to our users. There's a security implication here. And what I'm trying to do when I go and talk to customers is I say SSO, or single sign-on, which is a huge part of web access management, is not necessarily about making your users happy. Okay, it's about having complete control from a single dashboard. So think of it this way. If you have a single place where people go to log in, and that place is logging me into the systems behind the company firewall or behind the the base firewall, it's logging me into systems that are out in the cloud, all this kind of stuff. And let me give you another example. I don't want to give a military example, I'll give a civilian example. So we've got an employee in our company, he writes this crazy blog entry, right? He seems kind of like somebody we really need to get rid of. It's a big risk to the organization, so we fire him. If I don't have a single place where I can make sure that all the access is controlled everywhere that this person goes, I don't have a way of shutting off his access everywhere. So imagine, let's just go something simple. There's a Dropbox account, right, where we're storing files out on the internet. He still has the user ID and password to that, so he can go in and delete everything. He can go upload incriminating information. He can download it and give it to WikiLeaks. But if I was accessing Dropbox through my central identity provider, then when I flip off his access, he can't get to Dropbox anymore. Okay, and so here again, I'm looking at this luxury of saying, I've got this central web access management hub, and I'm making it really easy for this employee to log into all these different places, but I'm not looking at it that way as a security person. I'm looking at it in a way where I can say, I can shut off this person's access in a heartbeat. Now, I've got a company that I visited recently. I'll put it this way, y'all are going to know what I'm talking about. I probably shouldn't even give that good of a description. It's a high adventure, let's just say it's a high adventure company. I really don't want to be any more precise than that. And this company is 100% cloud-based. 100% cloud-based. Okay, what that means is that every single application they use is not on the corporate network. It's all out on the internet. So their design tools, their documentation, their spreadsheets, their accounting software, their HR software, everything is 100% out on the internet. And this guy came to me and he said, what do I do? Because I don't know what people are accessing, and I don't have control over what they access. And when the auditors come in and they say, what does Joe have access to in your organization? He says, I have no idea. What if someone in his organization today comes in after writing a horrible blog article or whatever and gets fired? How is this CIO, okay, how is this CIO going to say, I need his access terminated from everywhere? He simply can't do it. right? Because the account that's used over here in the design system, I don't know the credentials to that for this person. There's no logging of him getting into the this architecture system out here, et cetera. Again, having complete control from a single dashboard is a huge issue here. I kind of am beating this point to death, but I can't say enough about it sometimes. So the next thing we talk about, other than just saying complete control from a single dashboard, is the ability to secure applications. Now, usually in a web access management scenario, when you're securing applications, you're talking about federated applications, right? You're talking about something that uses SAML, WS Federation, some sort of technology like that. That's no different than like your driver's license or a CAT card. Okay, so the idea is, imagine getting pulled over by a police officer, and the police officer says, give me your identification. I don't call the DMV and say, hey, I need identification, can you send it to the cop? They've already given me identification. It's my driver's license. So I pull it out, I show the police officer. I can also use that same driver's license to now get access to the bar. If I get carded, God forbid. I can use it to, well, if there were voting laws somewhere, I could use that to whatever you use driver's licenses for, okay? Buying ammo in California, can you believe it? I gotta use a driver's license to do a background check now. Anyway, the point is that the ID that was given to me by the DMV, I can use that over and over and over again. That's an example of single sign-on. And so in Federation, it's the same way. When you log onto a web portal, you put your credentials somewhere, it gives you an identity. Essentially, this is how it works. It's a token that has information about you, your first name, your email, all this kind of stuff. And then when you go from website to website to website, you just basically present that same identity again. You don't need to log in anymore. You don't need to reuse your password. The problem is a lot of the password, or the sites that we use have user IDs and passwords in them. They don't accept the Federation token. Right now, this is a little technically complicated, but bear with me here. So when I go log on to Evernote, it doesn't say, give me your identity token or your driver's license. It says, put your username and password here. Now I have a risk again to me, where I have, this gentleman here needs to know his user ID and password, and I don't know how he's maintaining that. I don't know what his user ID and password is. A real web access management solution can actually control access to a site that uses username and password. You can do this through something called reverse proxying. Okay, a lot of people do it through browser plugins, like a browser plugin that sees you navigate to that site and then it actually goes into a database and says, I'm going to put your username and password in here for you. And it's getting that username and password from who knows where. If you really wanted to go kind of like to the extreme when it comes to securing access to websites, this is something that you could do. It's not only just federated sites, it's also sites that are using a user ID and password box. You can also populate those. Anyway, I don't want to beat that point up too much.
Question though.
Yeah.
If you have a single sign-on that lets you, like you said, you let the security manager secure everything by getting rid of everything at one time, you're also allowing a one-step entry into everything.
Yeah.
I mean, so I understand what you're saying, but you're doing just the opposite of what you want to do on the front end to prevent it on the back end.
Yeah, so basically, let me see if I got your question right. You've made it so easy for a person to break into everything because now all they need is one credential. That's a good point. And so there's a couple things that we're going to do with that one credential. Everybody understand that question, right? Basically, I'm saying if I can secure access to everything you have access to, then really all you need to do is get a master key. And so there's a couple things we're going to do in a web access management portal. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to enforce multifactor, okay, so that when you log into that site, you're also going to get prompted for some second factor, okay, whether that's a text message to your phone or like a little USB key or a prox card or something like that. We can do all those types of things. One of the other things we're going to do is we're going to implement risk in a web access management platform. So we're going to analyze all what's called the behavioral analytics. We're going to do behavioral analytics over everything this person is doing when they access that platform. So basically what happens now when I access it is I put in my credentials and an engine kicks off that says, okay, let me analyze everything I can analyze about Joe while he's trying to access this web portal. And again, I'll get back to your question in a second. So I know the IP address he's coming from. I know geographically where he's logging in from, Southern California. He's the time of day that he normally comes in from. I see the machine he's logging in from, the browser he's logging in from. I see the application he's logging into. And then I go and I look at the directory that he belongs to, like Active Directory, and I see what groups he belongs to. Does he belong to like a normal user group, or is he a super user admin group? We can do things like, and I'll get to my point here in a second, we can do things like geovelocity. I can see that you logged in from Dallas 5 minutes ago, but now you're logging in from Wisconsin. It's impossible to travel from Dallas to Wisconsin in 5 minutes, so there's a geovelocity issue here. It's not that you're logging in from Wisconsin, it's that you got there in 5 minutes. We're going to look at blacklists and whitelists and graylists. We're going to look at like known threats on the internet. Is this connection coming from a known threat on the internet, like a Tor network or a VPN network that's hiding the fact that the actual connection is coming from North Korea? Then we're going to finally look at, is it coming from North Korea, China, Iran, Sudan? We're going to look at those things as well. And so what I hope that we can do is basically say through analytics, I'm fairly certain that this person is who they say they are. If the risk is too high, I'm going to do a couple different things. I can shut off their access completely because the risk is way too high, or I can simply say, I'm going to prompt you for multi-factor and make sure that you give that multi-factor token in. Now, when it comes to multi-factor, we're going to talk about this more in a second, because even there are some people who believe that multi-factor is a failed technology. And I don't think they really see the light there either. But so let's get back to your point, though. All that I just said was, I'm going to do the best that I can to make sure that the person who's logging in is the actual person logging in, and not some sort of a threat. And I'm going to try to do that through a risk engine, through behavioral analytics. So what we're saying now is, okay, imagine someone has your credential, they get prompted for multi-factor, they're able to give a multi-factor token, and then all the behavioral analytics we have about the user are still telling us that this is a green light, we're going to let them in, and now they have access to everything. I think, generally speaking, that's going to be fairly rare. It's not impossible. But unfortunately, I think the answer to your question is the benefits outweigh the risk. That's really what it comes down to. You cannot have an environment where, again, put it this way, let's use Evernote as an example. I don't know what Evernote's brute force protection capabilities are. And if my corporate notes are out there, like the note that I'm going to lay off half the company in a couple of weeks, that gets out to the market, it's going to do real damage in the market. I can't have someone brute force attacking the Evernote login with my credential, and Evernote just kind of goes, yeah, okay, what am I going to do about it? And so I would rather say I need Evernote to be controlled and the access to be controlled from me, because I know what I'm doing to make sure this is protected, and I don't want to trust these other places that they're not doing it correctly. So super good question, but I don't think my answer really solves it. It's just kind of a risk that I think you're going to have to take. Yeah, good question though.
Talk about a lot of scenarios where it's either an enterprise or a corporate structure where you kind of have a holistic view of all of the things that needs to be accessed. From a personal view, are you the analogy like a LastPass or some other web service that manages your passwords?
Yeah, so again, just for the recording, the question is, it's one thing where you talk about a corporation, but what about individuals, right? What do individuals do for something like this? Let's talk about the normal consumer, not me. Right, because I'm a little nutty. I wrote my own, it's really funny, I have password management software on my machine because I write down my passwords, but I wrote the software, and people that look over my shoulder that, well, why did you write your own software, you're an idiot. I'm like, well, because I don't know what these other people have done. Like, I'm not going to trust that this isn't being copied to Russia, for crying out loud. Is LastPass copying the credentials to Russia? I don't know, probably not. So what does a normal civilian do? The other thing I said, by the way, is I create different email addresses. I have a bunch of domains that I own, and when I go, like when I need to go create an account to go shop for a car or something, and the Ford wants me to log in and create an account or whatever, I'll go create a Ford email address, and then as soon as I'm done shopping for a car, I delete that email address and it's gone. So even if you were to steal my email address and my credential, you'd say, okay, now let's go try to log onto Google with Ford at whatever. It's not going to work. That's not my Google credential. I'll show you my Google credentials in a second. Kind of. So what does a normal person do? I think that, yeah, I'm uncomfortable with LastPass, quite honestly. And one of the reasons or anything basically on my computer that doesn't have a significant authentication mechanism to unlock the passwords that it's storing. And again, the reason is it's highly unlikely, but I make mistakes. I'm a human being, that's the problem. And I'll leave my laptop open, and if someone comes over to my machine and hits my bank, and it puts in the credentials, now they're in my bank account, right? You need something that's gonna stop that from happening. Now the funny thing is, the best thing that you can do is have a different password for every place you go into, and change it on a fairly regular basis. But no one is going to do that. It's just not gonna happen. And the other thing that someone's going to do is they're going to say, okay, well, my Adobe password is Adobe 123, my bank password is Wells Fargo 123. I'm seeing a pattern out of 2 sites. So I think the best thing that you can do is that, yeah, you need to have a different password for every site. But if you're going to do that, then you need a way of documenting it. Everybody has to have a way of documenting it. In my personal opinion, storing it in an encrypted Excel file is inadequate, because that Excel file doesn't have any brute force protection on it. And if I got the file, I just run a password hash across it, and the next thing I know, I open it up. It's not hard to do. So having some sort of software that'll store your user IDs and passwords, like LastPass, I think is a fairly good idea. But try to make sure that it's encrypted in some way, or not encrypted, but that it's itself secured with a complicated password. But basically, that's my short answer. Try to have a different password for everything. Try, if you can, to have a different user ID as much as you can. But now that you have a password for everything, then just do your homework and make sure that you're storing it in a place that's really secure. Not the best answer. The thing that would be the best thing that you could do is try to take advantage of multifactor also, right? So my Google account is enabled with multifactor. My Microsoft account is enabled with multifactor. Everywhere I go, I try to enable multifactor. And that's going to basically take this 20% attack vector that I have on the accounts that I have and seal it up to almost 1% attack vector. That multi-factor thing is just going to seal it up. But yeah, so anyway, in the civilian life, just do whatever you can to try to enable multi-factor everywhere you can find it. Question?
I was just going to say, so how do you approach the problem where you want to use multi-factor, but the primary tool of multi-factor is a cell phone, and you work in an environment where you can't bring your cell phone?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was at the Pentagon. I'm sure many of you probably been there at some point or other. And they took my cell phone, they took everything, and I had to put it in a little locker, before I went in. So it depends on what you want to secure with multi-factor. And we talk to a lot of people about these things called UV keys. They're these hardware tokens, okay? A UV key basically is a little USB key that you can stick into the side of a computer. It acts like a keyboard driver, so it doesn't require any special drivers. It's just like plugging in a keyboard. For this small percentage of places you go to where the USBs are shut down, that could be a problem. Okay. Yeah, that could be a problem. Yeah. So I don't know, other people are kind of like, yeah, man, USB is not going to work. There's also digital cards that you can take with you. If you know that you're a person who's going to be faced with a situation where you might have to type in a code, then you're going to need to find an alternative. So right now with me, again, I could pull out the UV keys just as an example. A lot of police use UV keys because, again, it sticks in, and as they're driving and they get a multi-factor prompt, they don't need to touch it or see it, or they don't need to see it. They just kind of touch this UV key on the computer that's on the dashboard, and it'll pump in the code for them. Now, there are technologies that allow alternatives. Dell has a great one, as a matter of fact, not that I'm here to sell Dell technology, but just to give you an example, it's called GridSure. And GridSure is let's say you have your laptop, and your laptop is secured with multi-factor, which I believe everybody should do. Every organization should secure every laptop with multi-factor. But I always get the question, okay, well, what do I do when I'm on a plane and I can't communicate with the multi-factor server? Or what do I do if I'm on a plane or I'm disconnected or someone's taken my key generator or whatever? Just as an example, what we'll do is we'll show you the multi-factor prompt, and if you can't put one in, and the policy allows you to do this, we'll actually show you something that I call like a Sudoku puzzle. It's like a puzzle that comes up on the screen with a bunch of randomized numbers. And on this grid, there's a pattern that you've pre-registered that only you know. Maybe it's like a Tetris piece, or like 2 eyes and a nose and a smiley face or whatever, right? You have this pattern that only you know, and the numbers are on the screen, and it allows you to say, okay, well, based upon the randomized numbers, my code is 56272, whatever. Okay, so there are ways to get tokens in environments where you can't normally get them, okay? But it doesn't necessarily solve the problem you're talking about, where you know, you're trying to get into SAP, for example, and it's asking you for a multi-factor token, and the only way you normally get is with your mobile phone, but they just lock that in the thing, so you pull your USB key, you stick that in, that doesn't work. So you pull that out and hope that you've at least got like a Go 7 or something like that with a little digital readout or a little credit card digital readout. But go ahead, did you have a follow-up to that?
Oh, well, it's just, the pattern thing sounds nifty, but it sounds like it basically just breaks the more general cases. It's basically a second password. And
It's kind of like a second password, yeah. And a lot of people have a hard time saying that that's true multi-factor, right? And we're going to get into multi-factor more in a second, but a lot of people do see that and they kind of go, that's just another password. There are some nuances to it. It's the only way basically you could pull this off without having a token or without having the ability to generate a token. The only way you can pull this off is to show something that'll prompt the user to say, given some random numbers and a pattern that only you know in your head, the other thing you can do is you can add a PIN number to that. But the truth is, and this is something that we're going to get to this in multi-factor, I could beat that out of somebody, quite honestly. I could take a wrench and beat someone over the head and say, what's your pattern? And that's the problem. With multi-factor, generally speaking, being able to beat someone and then walk away and being able to repeat just simply by knowing it's the shape of a Tetris piece. Anyway, getting in a little bit too much detail here, but yeah, that's kind of the problem.
I can say the way I do it with my Google account, since I can't take my phone in, is Google will give you a list of one-time passcodes, and it's still a passcode. You probably
Yeah.
don't write it down when you take it to the building, but it's a one-time key. That's how I get around it.
That's
I appreciate that.
That's actually a pretty good point. You can get multiple passcodes at a time, but you got to be careful with the time sensitivity, right? Because sometimes those one-time passwords will expire. And so if you know you're going somewhere, you can get that list, but then you might only be able to use it for a certain amount of time. So sometimes you can tweak how much time that is, but just be aware of that. That's a great suggestion, because like we even do that with our multi-factor solutions. We can give you a whole list of numbers that you can have. And we can change the expire times. All right, so let's try to move on a little bit. Still wrapping up web access management. One of the things that we do also when we have web access management is we have the ability to audit. And again, I'm kind of talking about the benefits of web access management. The benefits when it comes to passwords and whatnot are kind of there, but just talking about some of the other benefits. The one thing I like about auditing is auditing the bad. That's the thing I really like about auditing. And again, when we have people logging into all these different sites and we have web access management that is an alternative, now we can see everybody logging in and someone can say, hey, are there any brute force attacks happening on the OneNote account? And again, we're going to see that here because it's all going through the same IDP. And let's go ahead and move through here. Yeah, you can secure an application that doesn't have security. Web access management does have the ability also to take an application in your environment that either has really poor security, like there's some applications that log in using header injection. They expect to have a header injected. Well, anybody can duplicate that and inject a header and log in, automatically. So what you want to do is you want to put, again, some sort of intermediary in front of that website that can capture that traffic and add or layer on top of it a lot more security. Okay, more exciting stuff. Back to passwords, quite honestly. Let's talk about privileged accounts. So privileged accounts are the accounts that are used to get access to sensitive information. So Unix administrators, we're talking about root access. Windows environments, we're talking about Active Directory servers, things like that, right? So domain administrators, DNS admins, SQL database super administrators or system administrators, etc. These are privileged accounts. And I said in one of the earlier slides that privileged accounts are like the holy grail for a hacker. Quite honestly, if you log on to the Dell organization with my user ID, I'm not a privileged user there, you wouldn't be able to do too much. You could get my email, you could see my HR, that's about it. If you logged in with our privileged users, though, the damage you could cause is irrevocable. I mean, it could just be tremendous. And so when it comes to passwords and user IDs, this is one of the most sensitive, important things we need to secure, our privileged access. And I often talk about this little point here. Having access to these credentials is a blessing and a curse. There's two people I run into in an organization. They're usually the guys with the Unix guys with the long ponytails sitting in the back of the room. But they say two things. They say, please don't take away my SA access, right? I need to be able to log in, put in my credentials, boom, do my job. And the idea of me coming in there and saying, I'm going to change the way you guys are using privileged access is terrifying to them. Then there's the guy that I think is smarter, right? This is the Unix root administrator who says, please take away my SA access. The reason why he's seeing the light is because when something hits the fan, and I come in to do an AAR and I see that this guy's credentials were used, there's two possibilities. Either he did it, or someone stole his credentials and did it. Regardless, the stigma that's been put onto this administrator and the fact that he's probably going to be terminated is huge. And so what I'm finding is that most administrators are starting to kind of think to themselves, you know what, I don't want to have this type of access anymore. It's too risky. I would much prefer some sort of privileged access management that's going to take care of this for me. So what do you do with these? All right, why do we care? Well, let's talk about what we do with them first, and we're going to talk about why we care. So the solution to privileged access management, or privileged credentials, is to use something called privileged credential vaulting, or something like this. And basically, the process works like this. We'll put in a system, not we, but anybody, we'll put in a system. Let's just say we're talking about a Unix machine. The system's going to go and reach out to the Unix machine with the administrator credentials. We're going to tell the system, here are the administrator credentials for this system. It's going to log in, and it's going to change the administrator credentials to some huge random GUID, some massive password that just simply can't be hacked. Okay? At this point, nobody knows what the password is to this server, which is terrifying for a lot of people. I mean, believe me, it is terrifying. Literally, if you shut the machine down right there without doing anything else, you're never going to get this machine again, because it's just been completely, let's just say it's been have a really bad password on it now, a really big one. So now what we do is we go through a process, right, that says this group of people or this person is the administrator to this box. He's allowed to have access under these circumstances. And you go basically through a checkout system, okay? And so what will happen in a checkout system is you log in, we're going to do some behavioral analytics, we're going to make sure the risk is okay, we're going to show you a multi-factor prompt if we have to, and then you're going to say, I want access to this root system. And two things are going to happen. It's going to say, okay, how long do you want it for? And you're going to say, I only need it for 10 minutes. And say, that's too much. You can only have it for 5. Or you can have it for 30, or you can have it for 2 days, whatever you say. And then it's going to say, okay, I'll give you the password, and you check it out, and it'll show you the password on the screen, or do whatever it has to do to get you that password. You take it, you go access the root machine. Now, when you're done, it'll automatically check itself back in and encrypt it again, right? So it's going to actually go out to that Unix machine. It's going to write the password for you temporarily, allow you to log in and do the work you need to do. And then when you're done, it's going to go back and it's going to encrypt that password again so even you don't know it. Now, one of the other things that we do is that we record everything that happens. Okay, so if you have really good privileged access management, not only am I going to be able to change the user IDs and passwords for you, but I'm going to record every single thing that you do. So even when you do log in with the password I give you, if I find that all these records in the database were deleted, and you say, hey, it wasn't me, you can say, go check the tape, all right? And so we'll go back and we'll look at the tape and we'll see all the commands this person executed. We'll see him log out. We'll see the password get reset. And we'll go, yeah, it wasn't you. So however this database got deleted, it wasn't you. But basically, the moral of the story with privileged password management is the people that need these passwords don't have them anymore. Nobody knows the password to a privileged server. Nobody knows the password to the SQL database. Nobody knows the password. Kim Jong-un doesn't know the password to the SQL database. Nobody knows what the password is. The only way you can get it is through a very secure system that will actually say, here, I'll give you the password, meanwhile, let me go change it to allow you to go in. That's basically what privileged account management is. Any questions about that? It's kind of a fast scenario. Good? Okay, so basically the benefits here, again, let's take a look at that first one. The user account credentials cannot be compromised. There is no way to write them down. There's no way to tell anybody. There's no way to, well, let's take a look at this cartoon. This is what I was saying earlier. An admin can't have the credentials beaten out of them. So this is one of my all-time favorite cartoons where basically they find this laptop and they're like, oh my gosh, it's got 4096-bit RSA encryption. We can't break in. And they're like, well, here, take this $5 wrench and beat the credentials out of the admin. So, I mean, there's lots of ways you can get passwords, but this particular scenario here is basically impossible at this point. Because no matter how much you beat someone and say, what's the password to the root machine, they're going to say, I don't know what it is. I can't get it. Okay? So, pretty secure way of handling privileged account passwords. Check the time real quick. All right. My favorite topic, quite honestly, which again, if you remember the slide where I said we're talking password reduction technologies, this isn't about reducing a technology, but this is about doing whatever we can to make the password bulletproof, okay? So now we're talking, generally speaking, about the general user population. We're not talking about privileged users or anything like that. And this actually used to be correct. I had this slide before. I would show these credentials, and to tell you the truth, it's not correct anymore. I'll go ahead and be honest. But the simple fact is, if I did put my password on here, anybody in the room could go try to log on to Google, and there's no way they're going to be able to. Simply, they're not going to be able to. Because Google, anytime you try to access it, whether it's through creating an account on your phone, visiting a website, going to Picasa, going to YouTube, whatever, it's going to send me a multi-factor token. And without that multi-factor token, you're not going to get in. So again, like we were talking about earlier, the comment about grid share not necessarily being the second factor. This, for the folks that haven't heard it before, this is the traditional definition of multi-factor. Okay, something is your password. Okay, it's some sort of characters and strings, or some sort of passphrase that It could be the answer to a question, like where were you born? Although that shouldn't be used to secure a system. Something you have is the second factor. Okay, and so for me, again, I have multiple token generators on my phone. I've got USB keys. I've got dongles with little digital readouts on them. That's something I physically carry with me. The notion here being, it's one thing for someone in a different state to have captured my password. It's another thing completely for them to have some physical thing in their hand that they need to log in. And then finally, the last one is something you are, which is actually coming very quickly to basically everybody's devices. Right now, we're talking about thumbprints, retinal scans. This phone actually scans my eyes and unlocks with my eyes. And so that would be basically what we call the third factor, right? So the three factors are something you know, something you have, and something you are. Go. Passwords are compromised all the time, right? Latent password fingerprints are left in strange places. So what does that mean real quick? Latent password fingerprints. A lot of software has an ability to cache credentials. Windows does this, right? You log into the corporate network, it checks Active Directory, checks your user ID and password, you disconnect from the network, reboot your computer, you log in, you put in your credentials, and it knows that they're right, even though you're not connected to the network. That's because there are latent credentials stored on the machine. Now they're stored in a heavily encrypted way, but not all the time. Some software has vulnerabilities to it that will actually store a hash of your credentials, and once you break that hash, everybody that's got the password cached on the application server is going to be vulnerable, right? Because I'm just going to reverse engineer what those password basically fingerprints are. And actually, there was a vulnerability in the target breach where this is one of the things that happened. The initial attack was through a VPN connection from the HVAC contractor, but once that person got in, they used an attack against a Kerberos flaw and a Windows server that wasn't patched, and they were able to get the admin credentials. All right, so that is a latent password fingerprint. So again, when we're talking about multi-factor, we want to say, where are the different places we can lose user IDs and passwords? That's one of them. Okay, so we all know what multi-factor is. Why do we care? And again, this is the biggest point we can have. Kim Jong-un may have your password, but he doesn't have your phone. Okay, and that's a big deal. It's, again, one thing completely to know what someone's user ID and password is. It's another thing completely to have their second factor. Multi-factor is easy, and let's talk for a second here about the roadblocks to multi-factor. The way that I talk with a lot of companies about multi-factor is I say, this isn't your granddad's multi-factor, okay? Back in the old days, it was very difficult to implement. It wasn't intelligent. It was difficult to have key generators. And again, with the exception of some of you guys, I hope not all, everybody's got a phone today, right? Getting a multi-factor token is so ubiquitously easy with a mobile phone like this, it's kind of irrelevant that it's even an issue anymore. However, one of the other things that kept people from doing multi-factor were the fact that people were getting bludgeoned with multi-factor requests, okay? And that made people very unhappy. So what does that mean? It means I log on from my home laptop, I open up my computer, I log on to the Dell corporate network, and I access the HR system. Boom, it gives me a multi-factor prompt. Right when I do that, my wife says, can I get on for a second? Yeah, so I close the browser, she gets on, she goes, oh, you know what, never mind. Like, literally 5 seconds have gone by. I open my browser, I access the Dell corporate network, and boom, I'm prompted with multi-factor. This is what I call getting bludgeoned with multi-factor. It's the second roadblock. So the first roadblock to multi-factor, generally speaking, is the issue with tokens. How am I going to get a token? Usually that's taken care of in the corporate world, for sure, because there are too many places we go where we can't take our mobile phones. But again, the second thing is that when you're doing multi-factor with risk, we can actually do two things. So first of all, in the industry now, we recognize that close to 98 to 99% of the time, the person that's attempting to log into your system is the person that's supposed to be logging in. It is the person that has the credentials. It's literally almost 100% of the time. So in other words, the times where there's an attack happening with all the authentication attempts in your environment is close to 1 to 2%, okay, based upon the studies that have been done. And so what's happening in the industry is people are saying, let's stop making it difficult for people to log in and instead make it easier for people to log in, okay? The only way you can do that, the only way you can make it easier for people to log in is if you're combining multi-factor with a risk engine. Because again, you need to find those attacks. You need to look at the machines that are coming from known threats. You need to look at the fact that Joe's logging in from Beijing, Joe's not in Beijing. You need to do all these kinds of things. Once you instead focus on the anomaly, and you say, okay, I'm finding an anomaly, now you can give someone a multi-factor prompt. But if you can do enough analysis, and you can say, look, this is Joe, he's at home, he's on his browser, this is his IP address, he's still accessing. The risk is so low, don't show someone a multi-factor prompt. So there's an important reason why I'm bringing this up. We can basically be an organization that tells people what to do. I'm going to get into this in a second. It's my last couple of slides. But we can't do that anymore, right? If we're interested in security and we want to be good evangelists of the proper way to do things, we can't tell people that we're not going to do things with intelligence anymore. Okay, so we're going to get to that in a second. To put it simply, just to wrap up multi-factor authentication, nearly all recent breaches would have been stopped dead in their tracks if two-factor was enabled somewhere. Literally everywhere. I've done studies of breach after breach after breach after breach, and honestly, take my word for it, nearly every single one of them would have been stopped if there was two-factor. That's a fact. So putting two-factor in is a huge, huge, hugely important thing to do. Again, even on your own personal devices as well. All right, so face it. Let's wrap up. We're going to talk about how we do this stuff in reality, though. No matter what you do, no matter how many layers of defense that you have, there's always going to be this weakest link. And the weakest link is always people and the way they handle user IDs and passwords. And so if there's anybody in here that has the ability to influence in the organization, or if there's anybody here that says, hey, I don't like the way this is being done, go back to command and say, hey, something needs to be changed here. And this is how you can do that. So what I see in the industry is two different types of security organizations. And it is never in the gray area. It's only two types of security organizations. There's one that says, we're here to tell you what you can't do. And they're the security guys that are basically sitting there with the monitors of the matrix code flying back and forth, and they're looking for an attack, and they go, boom, shut that down. And when you go to these guys and you say, hey, we're interested in using this new cloud-based such and such, they say, no, can't be done. It's not secure. That is the organization that is the Department of No. And this is the organization that says, when I go to them and I say, hey, it's time for you guys to start evolving and doing this and creating a new web access management solution, they kind of go, well, we can't do that. Nobody will do what we say. It's because they've created a culture in the organization where they're antagonists. Okay, nobody likes these people. And so what I do is I come in and I say, okay, the first thing, if you want to, I talk to security organizations that have this problem, and they ask me, what do I do? You're telling me I have a cultural problem. What do I do? So the first thing you do is you get executive or director sponsorship. Make sure that the cultural change you're about to make in your organization is going to be supported, okay, either by command or in the public sector, executive director sponsorship. Okay, because once you have that, then you can start moving on to the next steps, which is focusing on people. The solutions you put in your organization have to be people-focused. Because again, when it's talking about user IDs and passwords and multi-factor privilege, you have to bring the people in, and you have to say, what do you want? This is what we're thinking of doing. Finally, be nimble and promote intelligent change. I want to see security people and people that are interested in security actually being at the table with the business units, right? You need to be a partner with these folks. You need to understand what that other organization is trying to do and kind of work with them. Don't be an organization, again, that comes in and says, no, you can't do this, you can't do this. Basically, the idea is change the culture, and become the Department of Yes. And when you do this, now people are coming to you and saying, hey, we're interested in doing such and such, and you can say, yeah, we can do that because now we have this in place. Or you can be an evangelist of your own security technologies. Imagine these folks that are dealing with all these different user IDs and passwords and all this kind of stuff, and you're out here with a solution. You've got web access management with risk and multifactor and all this kind of stuff. You evangelize to the organization that, hey, these are the threats you guys are facing, and we can actually offer a service to you. We're not telling you to do it, we can offer a service to you. It's going to make it easier, it's going to make it more secure, etc. And then basically this is a kind of like a highlight of what I try to teach corporations that I come into. This is how you make these types of changes. So that's about it, honestly, for me today. Just anybody have any questions about passwords, multi-factor, that kind of stuff? Question? Go ahead.
Sir, in the civilian sector, how do you see money? Money is usually a factor. So how do you sell multi-factor authentication to your company if they can't afford it? What's your technique on that?
Yes, the question is, how do you get multi-factor if you can't afford it? There's multi-factor that you can do that is free. Okay, so with a small company, normally I'll say, hey, look, here's some of the things you can do, but it's going to cost money. So the thing that I tell companies is this. Right now, companies have a tendency to budget based upon profit, right? How much money am I going to spend? How much more productive am I going to be? It's just simply what we were taught in school, right? I turn that upside down. I say the budgeting on security you need to make isn't based upon profit, it's based upon risk. What's going to happen if you don't do this? Okay, so in the military, what's going to happen if, how this tank's radar system is going to be stolen? Or what's going to happen if the missile system we put in Afghanistan on the Air Force Base is going to be compromised? It's not about, hey, imagine how much better, or this, it's imagine what's going to happen if we don't do this. And so basically what I tell people is, it's going to cost money, but you got to have to flip that over and think of it more as what is it going to cost if we don't do it, right? Look at the risk instead. But there are some pretty inexpensive solutions out there. Follow up?
Your last one, on the opposite side of the spectrum, would you say biometrics would be a nice alternative to passwords as we go into the future? It's not
Yeah, no, I think biometrics are a great example. Quite honestly, it's kind of difficult to break someone biometrically unless fingerprints, they're doing that all the time. So I think, quite honestly, you're going to have to do something with like your eyes. That's really hard to kind of duplicate. It's a little premature. There's something called the FIDO Alliance, FIDO. You guys can look this up. It's coming. Windows computers are the first ones to really take advantage of it with Windows Hello, where it does facial recognition. I'm one of the 6 people that bought a Windows phone. It scans my eyes. So there was actually a guy in the plane with a Windows phone. I was so warm and fuzzy. I'm like, oh my God, he's got a Windows phone. Anyway, good question. So FIDO's coming. It's a little premature, but yeah, biometrics will eventually be the key. Really hard to do though if you don't have any sort of device that'll scan you though. And it's the problem is how do you ubiquitously secure all your apps and all your stuff with biometrics? So we're getting there. Any other follow-up questions? All right, thank you for your time, guys. 11:30.